Everyone thought the billionaire's daughter was born completely blind, but a new black maid uncovered a secret that shocked them all. For years, nobody dared to question it. Not the doctors, not the staff, not even her own father. She lived in silence, disconnected from the world, hidden inside a mansion overflowing with secrets. But everything changed the day a new maid stepped inside those gates. She wasn't a doctor, not a specialist, just someone who noticed the smallest details. What she uncovered during her quiet hours of work would rip apart years of lies, drag a powerful family's past into the light, and expose a truth that had been buried since the day the little girl took her first breath. What began as a simple job soon became a dangerous mission. And the man who thought he had done everything to protect his only child was about to face the unthinkable. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Richard Wakefield was a man whose name carried weight in the agribusiness world. He built a billion-dollar empire with hard work and ruthless precision. But behind closed doors, his life looked nothing like success. He stayed hidden in a massive, isolated mansion, far from the city, alone with his daughter, Luna. The house was filled with priceless art, crystal-clear glass windows, and long, echoing hallways. Yet, despite all its beauty, it felt like a tomb. Richard had lost his wife in a helicopter crash just days after Luna's birth, and that single moment shattered him. He didn't choose the mansion for peace. He chose it because he couldn't face the world anymore. His empire no longer mattered. His daughter was the only thing keeping him alive, but Luna's condition made everything unbearable. From the very beginning, doctors told him she was blind, that she would never see his face, never know the world as it really was. Richard blamed himself, and guilt gnawed at him every single day. He poured his fortune into specialists, tutors, therapists from every corner of the globe, yet nothing changed. Luna didn't laugh. She didn't play. She barely spoke. Most days, she sat silently by the window, clutching a worn teddy bear, her gaze fixed on nothing. Her world was quiet, distant, unreachable, and Richard, powerless, despite all his wealth, could do nothing but watch. At 42, grief had aged him far beyond his years. His once sharp eyes were sunken, his beard streaked with gray, his movements slow and heavy, like a man dragging chains he couldn't break. He turned down meetings, ignored friends, and left his company to run itself, unable to spend even an hour away from Luna. Every morning he followed the same ritual: dress her, feed her, guide her hand through the garden, whisper stories she never answered. Sometimes anger rose inside him, at fate, at doctors, at himself. Other times he'd break down quietly, apologizing into the silence, as if his daughter could feel the guilt bleeding from his chest. The staff in the mansion was small, loyal, and hushed. They kept their distance, never daring to disturb Luna. But even they noticed the little things. The way she sometimes hummed softly in the dark, or how her hand always reached for the same stuffed toy each night. Richard clung to these fragments like a drowning man grasping for air. He would sit by her side for hours, talking about her mother, describing the colors of the sky, praying that just one word or one smile might slip out. But she remained mostly silent. The mansion itself became a monument to grief. Huge rooms meant for laughter, and families stood lifeless. The nursery remained untouched, soft pastel walls, a rocking chair, toys never played with. Richard couldn't bear to change it, as though his wife might return and fill it with joy again. But Luna never showed interest, never explored. Richard still devoured every new medical study, begged every new doctor for hope, but disappointment always followed. Even so, he refused to give up. Every night after another day of silence, he tucked Luna in with trembling hands. She rarely moved, rarely reacted. Yet sometimes, for just a few seconds, she rested her head on his chest. That fleeting contact, her unspoken acknowledgement of his presence, was the only thing keeping him alive. He had promised to protect her, no matter what. And so, in that lonely mansion haunted by shadows and silence, Richard Wakefield lived. Each day for a little girl who never asked for anything. His daughter Luna, who sat quietly, eyes empty, always staring into nothingness. Julia Bennett was 27, and her own life had just been ripped apart. Only weeks earlier, she had buried her newborn daughter, a loss so sharp the doctors could barely explain what had happened. The grief left her hollow, living alone on the edge of town with no family, no partner, and nothing but work to keep the lights on. When she spotted a newspaper ad for a housekeeping job at the Wakefield mansion, she applied without much thought. Deep down, she wasn't looking for work. She was searching for an escape from the walls of her apartment, where silence screamed louder than any noise. The day she arrived, she was nervous but calm. She wore nothing flashy, just neat clothes, and carried herself quietly. To her surprise, Richard Wakefield himself opened the door. His face was stern, tired, but his eyes carried the weight of a man drowning in sorrow. He had interviewed others. Before her, polished professionals with glowing resumes, but none felt right. Some were too loud, some too cold, most unsettled by Luna's silence. But Julia was different. She moved gently, spoke softly, and didn't flinch at the eerie stillness of the house. Richard noticed it immediately. When Julia mentioned, almost, in passing, that she had lost a child, Richard's gaze sharpened. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. He saw it in her face, the mixture of unbearable grief and quiet strength. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't here for pity. She was simply someone who understood silence all too well. Julia's first day was quiet. She cleaned, organized, and followed instructions with precision. She moved from room to room like a shadow, never drawing attention. But at midday, when she entered the kitchen for a short break, she saw her. Luna sat near the window, clutching her teddy bear, eyes blank and distant. Julia froze. She had never seen a child so motionless. It wasn't just blindness. It was loneliness, deep and suffocating. Julia didn't approach, didn't speak. She simply sat across the room in silence, but even in that silence, something stirred inside her. She felt an invisible pull toward the little girl. Over the following days, Julia noticed things others ignored. The slight turn of Luna's head when someone entered, the faint flinch when a cloth hit the floor, the way she paused when Julia was near. Tiny details that others dismissed. Julia couldn't. She saw them, felt them. And something inside her, broken by her own loss, whispered that this child needed more than care. She needed connection. One afternoon, Julia was folding linens in the hallway when she heard it. A sound so faint she thought she imagined it. A hum. A child's hum. Her heart raced. She turned to see Luna on the floor, lips moving, whispering a tuneless melody. Julia sat down, silent, listening. When Luna crawled slowly into the hallway, Julia extended her hand without a word. Luna's small fingers hovered, then touched hers, just for a moment. But in that moment, everything changed. Trust, curiosity, connection. Julia felt it, and she knew her life had just taken a turn she couldn't ignore. From then on, Julia passed by more often, not to disturb, but to be near. Richard noticed the shift. Luna, who had once sat frozen in the window's light, now moved toward the hallways, toward the kitchen, toward life. When Richard asked Julia why, she spoke quietly. "She reminds me of someone I lost. I can't replace her, but maybe I can help." Richard said nothing, only studied her face. He saw no pity, just truth. That night, he stood outside his daughter's door, listening to her breathe, steadier, calmer than before. Something had shifted. Julia's presence had not fixed everything, but it had awakened something inside those walls. A spark, faint but undeniable. Days later, Julia was dusting Luna's room when something startling happened. The girl, usually silent, began whispering to her bear. Actual words, barely audible but real. Julia froze, her pulse thundering. She leaned closer, watching. And that's when she noticed something even stranger. Luna's head moved in perfect rhythm to every sound, a creak, a curtain, the faint hum of the vacuum down the hall. She was listening with uncanny precision, her senses sharper than anyone had imagined. Julia's heart pounded as she tested it quietly, dropping a toy, stepping across the rug, opening and closing a drawer. Each time, Luna reacted. But the moment that stole Julia's breath came when she accidentally flashed her phone's light across the room. For the briefest second, Luna's eyes flickered, her pupils shifted. Julia's blood ran cold. She tested it again. A wave of light. Luna's eyes twitched, following. Blind? Completely? Or had they all been wrong? Julia sat down, shaking, her heart torn between fear and hope. Could it be possible? Could this little girl, hidden for years, in silence, see even the smallest flicker of light? If so, why had no one ever noticed? That night, as Luna sat whispering to her teddy bear, Julia carried a new secret inside her chest, one that could change everything. Luna didn't move at first, but after a few silent seconds, her eyes twitched, following a shadow across the wall. It was tiny, almost like a reflex. Julia tried again, slower this time, and once more Luna's gaze shifted, barely noticeable, but real. Julia's pulse spiked. This wasn't coincidence anymore. Something inside the girl was responding. A hidden thread connecting her to the light. Not vision, not exactly, but not nothing either. Julia scribbled everything down, her hands trembling as she wrote. Every reaction, every flicker. She couldn't tell Richard. Not yet. He would think. She was imagining things, or worse, meddling. So she kept testing in secret. Flashes of light, quick shadows, shifts in brightness. Each time Luna reacted, subtle, inconsistent, but undeniable. Julia's certainty grew. Luna wasn't blind the way everyone thought. Then came the box. Hidden behind towels in the bathroom cabinet, Julia pulled it free, curiosity twisting in her chest. Inside, old bottles of eye drops, labels half peeled, some dating back years. Not dryness drops, not allergies. Something different. Julia squinted at the strange medical terms, unease rising in her stomach. Later, alone, she searched the compound on her phone. Her breath caught. These drops could lower eye pressure, but, in rare cases, long-term use could suppress pupil response, even light sensitivity, especially in children. Her chest tightened. What if Luna hadn't been blind all along? What if she'd been misdiagnosed? Or worse, treated into darkness? Julia put the bottles back exactly where they were, but the questions wouldn't stop circling her mind. That night she lay awake, torn between silence and truth. Telling Richard could ignite suspicion, but keeping quiet felt like betrayal. One thing was clear, Luna deserved more than this. She deserved a chance. So Julia became both caretaker and silent investigator. Days turned into experiments disguised as play. She tested light at dawn, at dusk, in hallways and bedrooms. And, each time, Luna flinched, blinked, or turned ever so slightly. Julia wrote it all down, her secret notebook filling with proof. Meanwhile, the routine continued. Every morning, the staff handed Luna those drops without question, and every morning, Julia's suspicion grew darker. The truth was hiding in plain sight, and Julia could almost hear it pounding in her ears like a warning. Finally, she couldn't wait anymore. One evening, the mansion was quiet. Richard in his office, staff gone. Julia slipped into Luna's room, with the small flashlight burning in her hand. She knelt across from the little girl, who sat clutching her teddy bear. "Luna," Julia whispered, her voice trembling, "I'm going to shine a light. Tell me if you feel anything." Slowly, she lifted the beam into Luna's eyes. For a few seconds, nothing. Julia's heart sank. Then, blink. A slow, confused blink. Then another, faster. Julia leaned in. "Do you feel that?" Silence, breathing. Then, in a fragile, broken whisper, the girl spoke. "I think I saw a light. Mommy." Julia's world shattered. Not only had Luna reacted, she had spoken, and not just any word, Mommy. A word she had never said to anyone before. Julia's eyes blurred with tears. Her arms trembled as she touched Luna's shoulder. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice cracking. Luna leaned forward, resting her small head against Julia's chest. For Julia, it wasn't just a test anymore. It was a bond, a connection stronger than medicine, stronger than fear. For several minutes, Julia held her, tears soaking silently into Luna's hair. Questions stormed her mind. How much could Luna really see? How long had this been hidden? Were the drops the reason? None of it mattered in that moment. What mattered was the warmth of a child who had just chosen her. From that night forward, Julia knew her job wasn't cleaning floors or folding sheets. It was protecting Luna at all costs. But fate didn't let the moment stay hidden. The next night, Julia knelt once more with the flashlight. Luna blinked again, following the beam. Julia's chest filled with joy until a voice thundered from the doorway. "What are you doing?" Richard. His face twisted with rage as he stormed in. He snatched the flashlight from her trembling hand. "Are you experimenting with my daughter?" Julia froze. But before she could defend herself, Luna moved. For the first time in her life, she ran. Straight into Julia's arms, clutching her with all her strength. The room went still. Richard's breath hitched. He had never seen his daughter move like that. "Luna?" he whispered, disbelief cracking his voice. The little girl clung to Julia's waist. Then, with a shaking voice, she said the words that would unravel everything. "I saw a light." Richard staggered back, his world tilting. What did you say?" "I saw a light," Luna repeated softly. Silence, heavy, shattering. Richard's shoulders fell as he whispered, "Stop the drops. At least for now." And so everything changed. Sophia promised to run the tests quickly. Days later, Julia's phone rang. Sophia's voice was tight, urgent. "You need to come. Now!" Julia's hands shook on the steering wheel as she sped to the hospital. Sophia led her to a quiet office, closed the door, and set the bottle of drops on the desk. Next to it lay a lab report. "These aren't normal eye drops," she whispered. "There's cyclopentolate inside, but in doses so extreme it forces the pupils to contract, kills light response, and over time convinces the brain it's blind. In adults, it's risky. In children, it can erase what little vision they have." Julia's heart pounded. "You're saying the drops blinded her?" Sophia nodded gravely. "Yes. If she wasn't fully blind from the start, these made sure. She stayed that way." Julia staggered into a chair, covering her mouth. "Could this be a mistake? A wrong prescription?" Sophia shook her head. "No, this was deliberate. Someone designed it." Julia glanced back at the paper and froze. At the bottom, the prescriber's name glared in bold, Dr. Atticus Morrow, Luna's lifelong doctor. Julia's stomach flipped. Sophia leaned closer. I've heard of him. Rumors, lawsuits in multiple states. Families who claimed his treatments harmed their kids. I thought he was gone. Julia left the hospital in a daze, the report clutched tight. By evening, she placed it on Richard's desk. He read every line, his face draining from confusion to rage. When his eyes landed on the doctor's name, he stood abruptly, pacing to the window. He told me Luna's optic nerve was undeveloped. He swore she'd never see. I believed him. Julia spoke carefully, explaining everything Sophia had revealed. Richard's fists clenched. I trusted him with my daughter's life. Julia's voice steadied. You didn't know. But now we do. Now we fight back. The search for Morrow began. Calls to old colleagues, licensing boards, offices. The answers were chilling. His license had been suspended. He had settled multiple cases in silence. Families whispered about strange prescriptions, permanent damage, and then nothing. He had vanished. Richard reeled from guilt, realizing he had never questioned. After his wife's death, he had simply obeyed. Julia dug deeper online. Forums, obscure blogs, bitter parents. The same name appeared again and again. Morrow. The weight of it crushed them both. But silence was over. Richard and Julia contacted a trusted journalist, preparing documents, lab results, testimonies. They didn't want fame, they wanted truth. Yet before their story could air, the attacks began. An article appeared online, smearing Richard as a negligent father. Another claimed Julia had faked Luna's progress. Lies, carefully planted, designed to destroy. Soon, Julia's phone buzzed. With threats, stay out of this or regret it. Fear gnawed at them. But so did clarity. If someone fought this hard to bury the truth, it meant the truth was deadly. Inside the mansion, though, a miracle unfolded. A specialist confirmed it. Luna had partial vision, shapes, light, movement. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. With therapy, she could strengthen it. Julia and Richard filled her world with colors, toys, sunlight. Slowly, Luna bloomed. She pointed at objects, recognized differences between day and night, laughed when crayons left trails of color. Julia wept the day Luna held up a crooked yellow drawing and whispered, "Is it good?" Richard knelt beside her, eyes glassy. "It's beautiful." That night, Julia taped the page to the kitchen wall. Meanwhile, the outside war raged. False articles spread. Anonymous accounts stirred chaos. Yet Richard's legal team traced fragments of evidence. Private servers, pharmaceutical ties. The smear campaign only confirmed their suspicion. Morrow wasn't acting alone. And still, Luna's world grew brighter. She named colors, learned. Letters scribbled her name for the first time. Each step forward was a blow against the darkness that had stolen years from her. Finally, Richard and Julia walked into the district attorney's office. No lawyers, no titles. Just a father and a caretaker carrying a folder heavy with truth. The prosecutor listened carefully, raising his brow at Morrow's name. "You're not the first to bring him up," he said quietly. Hope flickered. Investigations followed. Subpoenas. Files unlocked. The horror emerged. Morrow had partnered with pharmaceutical companies, secretly testing unapproved drugs on children. Money, perks, contracts, all buried until now. Dates, codes, signatures linked directly to Luna's drops. It was monstrous and undeniable. Theatrical that followed shook the country. Families came forward, parents cried on the stand. Julia testified with steady clarity, recounting how she discovered everything. Richard admitted his blind trust. The jury saw the truth. When the guilty verdict rang out, the crowd outside erupted. But inside, Richard and Julia simply drove home, in silence. Peace replacing years of torment. That night, Luna drew 3 stick figures holding hands. "It's us," she whispered. Morrow was sentenced, the companies fined and banned. But for Richard, Julia, and Luna, justice wasn't in headlines. It was in healing. Richard stepped back from business, Julia stayed by Luna's side, and Luna walked into a new chapter. School, friends, laughter. She learned to love colors, especially yellow. The house once filled with shadows now rang with joy. Years passed. Luna thrived, blossoming into an artist whose work told her journey. At her first exhibition, the gallery overflowed. She stood before the crowd, her voice steady. "People ask me when I first saw light," she said. "They expect me to say flashlights or sunlight. But the truth is, the first light I ever saw didn't come from my eyes. It came from her heart." She pointed to Julia. The room fell silent, then erupted in applause as Julia wept. The girl once trapped in darkness had become a voice for hope. A story of truth, love, and second chances, etched not just in colors on a canvas, but in every heart that witnessed her light. What would you do if you caught someone sneaking into a hidden cave at night? Share your thoughts in the comments. And subscribe to Black Nation Strength for more spine-chilling stories.